You are not stuck because you lack ability. You are stuck because every time you get close to what you want, you're the one who destroys the path. This pattern shows up exactly when you're just inches away from a real breakthrough. And it's in that moment that fear creates an internal force that makes you step back, doubt yourself, and retreat. Today, I'm going to show you why this happens, why your emotional system collapses at the moment of almost, and the blind spot that explains why you've been repeating this cycle for years. I'm also going to show you how to interrupt it now. Because if you do not understand this dynamic, the next few months will repeat everything that has already hurt you: hope, impulse, fear, and quitting. You will keep living always 2 steps away from the life you're trying to reach. Let's begin. There is a pain you avoid admitting even to yourself, the feeling of always being close to something important, but never crossing the finish line. It's as if your life were a cycle of almost, where everything seems about to happen, but dissolves before any real impact. This almost drains you more than any open failure because it convinces you that you are the obstacle. And the more it repeats, the more you believe that there is something broken inside you. What hurts you most is not the external difficulty. It's the silent doubt that maybe you're going to ruin everything again. That doubt consumes your energy and erodes your self-confidence, even when things are actually working. You try to convince yourself that this time will be different, but there's always an impulse, a fear, or a distraction that pulls you off the path. And you keep wondering why you never manage to sustain what you start. The closer you get to a real breakthrough, the stronger this pain grows. It feels like an internal alarm that goes off exactly when life finally seems to be moving forward. You feel a strange restlessness that pulls you out of focus and throws you into a mental state of false urgency. And it's in that imbalance that you slip back into old behaviors, as if you were hiding from your own change. If you look at your story, you'll notice something important. Your biggest setbacks do not happen when everything is hard. They happen when things are just starting to get better. It sounds contradictory, but it's real. You function well in the fight, but you destabilize when it's time to receive what you always wanted. Something in you confuses progress with danger, and that makes you retreat. This pain is silent, but devastating. It appears at the exact moments when you're about to make important decisions, the ones that shift directions, close cycles, or open doors. And right in those moments, your emotional system hits the brakes, not because you lack desire, but because of old conditioning. As if there were an invisible limit you never managed to cross. The feeling of always being on the verge creates a constant mental exhaustion. You live on alert, expecting the worst even when everything is going well. Nothing feels stable, nothing feels guaranteed. And behind that, there is a deep fear of losing what you haven't even achieved yet, because losing it would be the final proof that you were never enough. This pain shapes your life in the details. It infiltrates your decisions, your relationships, your career, and even your self-image. You try to appear confident and steady, but internally you live in conflict between wanting to move forward and fearing the emotional impact of that movement. And this contradiction silently becomes your identity. The cruelest part is that you feel like you're always late, as if everyone else were moving forward except you. That creates an internal pressure that only feeds more self-sabotage. The more you try to speed up, the more your emotional system pulls you backward. It's like trying to run with an anchor chained to your chest. This pain is not logical. It shows up as a sudden emotional wave that paralyzes you exactly when you know what you need to do. You have clarity, but no movement. You have plans, but no execution. And every time this happens, you reinforce the false belief that you weren't born for this. Living like this has a massive emotional cost. With every interrupted attempt, your mind records one more piece of evidence that things don't work out for you. And these proofs slowly shape your identity. You settle into the role of the person who always gets close, but never steps in. It's an emotional cycle you didn't consciously choose, but that you keep replaying without knowing how to get out. almost becomes an emotional prison. It keeps you busy, but never free. You spend your time trying, planning, adjusting, but nothing really solidifies. It's as if you're always rearranging the surface of your life without managing to make the one move that truly transforms it. And that creates a chronic sense of not being enough. The core pain is clear. You do not fear failure. You fear the emotional impact of success. Receiving something good requires a version of you that you still don't believe deserves to exist. And that lack of emotional preparation paralyzes you at the moment of almost, as if success were too dangerous to touch. The invisible cause of your self-sabotage is not in the present. It was born in past moments where growing meant losing, trying meant getting hurt, and moving forward meant facing something you did not have the emotional structure to handle. Your body recorded those memories, and today it reacts to progress as if it were a real threat, even when consciously you want to advance. Sabotage does not begin as a thought. It begins as a sensation. A sudden restlessness, a tightness in the chest, an urge to pull back. This discomfort shows up precisely when something good is getting too close. It's the first sign of the invisible cause in action, an emotional system trying to protect you from something that is already over, but still lives inside you. Your emotional body learned that the new is unstable, that progress can cost something important, and that every big step might come with rejection, loss of control, or abandonment. So when a new phase approaches, you do not feel excitement. You feel fear. The mind interprets growth as risk and fires impulses that pull you away from change. This invisible cause creates a constant internal noise. You start complicating what is simple, finding flaws where there are none, and questioning obvious decisions. That leads you to postpone, overthink, over-edit, restart when you don't need to, and give up at the exact moment you should persist. On the surface, it looks like prudence. In truth, it is emotional escape. Self-sabotage is not a discipline problem. It is not a focus problem. It is memory. Your emotional system is not fighting against success itself, but against the sensations success awakens, sensations you never learned to hold. This creates an internal conflict between who you are today and who you need to become to move forward. That conflict traps you in a loop. You make progress, discomfort rises, fear grows, the urge to quit appears, and dropping everything brings immediate relief. That relief is dangerous because it rewards the behavior. That's why the cycle continues, because emotionally, quitting works. Your mind is still running on the patterns of the old version of you, the version that felt incapable, ignored, overcharged, or responsible for everything. That version does not trust your current strength and tries to protect you from living something it believes will hurt. So it pulls you back every time life starts to open up. This creates a divided identity. The part of you that wants to advance cannot coexist with the part that fears that very advancement. Not because you are weak, but because you are conditioned. Your emotional system was trained to survive, not to evolve. And everything outside the known zone is treated as a threat. This invisible cause distorts your internal signals. Excitement turns into anxiety. Courage turns into self-criticism. Movement turns into paralysis. You start interpreting progress as something dangerous, and that distorted reading stops you from sustaining what you want to build. The emotional pattern generates automatic narratives. Not now. I'm not ready. I need to think more. These phrases surface without conscious reflection, like reflexes. They are conditioned responses you learn to repeat without noticing. And every repetition feeds the same version of you that has sabotaged you so many times. Sabotage at the almost stage is born from one specific fear, the fear of not being able to maintain what you want to achieve. This fear is so deep that you prefer to interrupt the process before it exposes you to the emotional risk of failing later. And so you protect yourself from the future while destroying your present. The invisible cause is this silent inner war. You are not fighting external circumstances. You are fighting the version of you that learned to stay safe by avoiding what you now call change. And until these two versions are separated and understood, you will keep losing at the exact moment you are about to win. There is a specific behavior that repeats itself every time you get close to a real breakthrough. You start looking for small flaws. Details that once went unnoticed suddenly become big problems. You find defects in what is already working and turn any uncertainty into a reason to slow down. This habit is not logical. It is an emotional defense disguised as caution. When things begin to move too quickly, you create justifications to reduce your pace. You tell yourself you need to think, need to wait, need to organize more. But this is never about organization. It is about fear. A part of you believes that if you delay just a little, the pain of failing will hurt less, as if you could soften the impact of what you fear. Another sabotaging behavior appears when something starts working. You raise the standard to an impossible level. Nothing is good enough. Nothing feels ready. Nothing feels safe. This exaggerated demand is your way of avoiding commitment to the next step. Because if nothing is ideal, you feel justified in stepping back without admitting you're running away. You also create emotional distractions. Problems that didn't exist suddenly occupy your mind. Small situations grow into something disproportionate, and you start feeling overwhelmed, as if the world had become too heavy. But this heaviness is not caused by progress. It comes from the stories your mind creates to sabotage that progress. Another pattern is isolation. When life demands a next step, you pull away from people. You become quieter, more withdrawn, more distant. Not because you need peace, but because you're afraid someone will confirm what you're already feeling, that you're about to face something too big for the version of you that you believe you are right now. There's also the behavior of shrinking your achievements. You receive a compliment and redirect it immediately. You achieve something and instantly minimize it. It's as if you were afraid of owning your own strength, because owning it would mean admitting that now you must sustain it, and that scares you more than failing. Self-sabotage also shows up as haste. When you feel something big approaching, you speed up impulsively, make rush decisions, or try to skip steps. It looks like action, but it is escape disguised as productivity. It is the attempt to quickly get rid of the anxiety that the almost stage triggers, even if it costs the stability of the entire process. Another behavior is excessive self-criticism. In critical moments, you become your own worst enemy. You question everything, doubt everything, reopen old wounds, and put your abilities into question. Self-criticism shows up as if it were protecting you, but in reality, it paralyzes you, shrinks you, and convinces you that you're not ready for any of this. Sabotage also appears as attachment to the past. You revisit old versions of yourself, relive old mistakes, remember failures that have nothing to do with the present moment. It's as if you were using your own memories to justify why maybe you shouldn't move forward. And that creates an emotional narrative that traps you in the same cycle. Another common pattern is seeking external validation. When you're close to something big, your insecurity rises and you search for opinions that will never give you the answer you're looking for. This search only feeds the doubt. And the more doubt, the stronger the self-sabotage, because you're trying to outsource a decision that no one can make for you. There's also the tendency to quietly abandon your processes, not because of external failures, but because of emotional exhaustion. You start letting small actions slip, neglecting important details, losing consistency. And when you notice, you're back at the starting point. Not because you didn't know how to move forward, but because you didn't know how to sustain the forward movement. The behavior that sabotages you the most is simple. You run from yourself exactly when you most need to stay. You don't run from what you want to achieve. You run from the emotion you must feel in order to achieve it. This unconscious escape is what keeps you in the cycle of almost always close, but never inside. Imagine someone who spent years trying to change her life. She took courses, planned, wrote goals, and visualized possibilities. Every time life advanced a little, she felt an intense mix of hope and fear. And when the moment came to take the real next step, something inside her froze. She told herself it wasn't the right time, that she needed more preparation. But deep down, it was fear. One day, this person received a concrete opportunity. It was something she had always wanted, something that could completely transform her reality. At first, she was excited, but soon anxiety replaced the joy. It was as if her body were reacting to progress, as if it were danger. At every detail, she found a reason to delay. In the following days, she began to withdraw from others. She didn't reply to messages, didn't share anything about the opportunity. It was as if she wanted to avoid any chance of being seen in that transition. Because being seen would mean held accountable, and being held accountable would mean having to sustain something she wasn't sure she could handle. She started creating justifications. I'm not ready. Maybe it's not the right moment. I need to get more organized. These sentences came automatically, without her really analyzing anything. It was as if she were trying to rationalize a fear that had no words, a fear of repeating the past, even though the moment was completely different. Then came the distractions, small problems that suddenly felt important, irrelevant tasks that became urgent. She spent energy on everything except what mattered. And in this, she began to lose sight of the real opportunity. Each day, her impulse to act weakened, while the feeling of incapacity grew. Over time, she began to doubt herself, not because anything was going wrong, but because the closeness of change triggered old memories. She remembered the time she tried and failed, the time she was disappointed, the time she believed in something and got hurt. These memories resurfaced as if trying to warn her of danger. This person then entered a state of almost quitting. She didn't quit openly, but she detached emotionally from the process. She acted mechanically, without real intention. It was as if she were waiting for time to decide for her, or hoping that some external obstacle would appear so she wouldn't have to face her internal retreat. When she finally realized what was happening, she felt shame. Shame of freezing in front of something she had wanted so deeply. But that shame did not bring action. It brought more withdrawal. She started believing that the problem was herself, that maybe she would never break the cycle. And that belief became stronger than the opportunity. Life continued moving around her while she remained stuck in the same place. Not because the world was hard, but because her mind was trapped in an old version of herself, the same version that, out of fear, had destroyed other opportunities before. She repeated the pattern without noticing, and by the time she understood, the moment had already passed. Years went by, and she still remembered the opportunity that almost changed everything. And every memory came with a painful thought. I was so close, but I ruined it. This sentence became a constant weight, an emotional scar that shaped her self-perception. This story is real because it happens to thousands of people every day. Almost becomes part of the identity. Self-sabotage becomes an automatic reflex. And life becomes a sequence of missed chances, not because they were impossible, but because the person never learned to sustain her own emotional transformation. The truth is, this story is a mirror. It reveals the internal mechanism that sabotages you, not out of malice, but out of fear. And as long as this fear dictates your actions, you will keep living on the edge of a life that is trying to arrive, but that you still do not allow yourself to receive. There is a specific moment when your path stops being dominated by fear and begins to be guided by awareness. This moment doesn't happen when everything gets better. It happens when you finally see the pattern that keeps you trapped. The emotional shift is not a burst of courage. It is a deep recognition you are not failing at the end. You are running from the emotional impact of the beginning. Real change starts when you realize that fear is not a prophecy. It is a conditioned reflex. It is not showing you what is about to happen. It is repeating what has happened before. The turning point happens the moment you separate who you are from who you had to be in the past to survive. This separation creates an internal space that never existed before. That space is where you begin to realize that your escape impulses are not conscious decisions. They are automatic emotional triggers. And when you see this clearly, something inside you shifts. Not because fear disappears, but because it stops being the center of your choices. You gain the ability to respond instead of react. The emotional shift is not bravery, it is lucidity. It is recognizing that the panic that rises when something goes right does not mean you are in danger. It means you are leaving your old version behind. And this realization disarms self-sabotage, because sabotage only works when you believe it's logical. When you see that it's only memory, it loses power. You begin to interpret discomfort differently. Instead of seeing it as a sign to retreat, you recognize it as a sign of expansion, a discomfort that says, you are entering new territory. This shift reduces the emotional intensity of the sabotage because you stop fighting what you feel. And when you stop fighting, you stop running. The shift also requires admitting a difficult truth. You are afraid of what you want, not because it's impossible, but because you've never lived it before. And the unknown activates your most primitive defenses. When you accept this truth without judgment, the internal pressure lowers. And for the first time, you feel like you can move forward without absolute certainty. At this point, something unexpected happens. You begin trusting yourself not because you're comfortable, but because you're conscious. Trust doesn't come from the absence of fear. It comes from recognizing fear without surrendering to it. This is the first sign that you are breaking the cycle of almost, because now fear stops commanding you. The emotional shift also reveals something important. The version of you that always sabotages is not your enemy. It is a part of you that still believes you are not ready. And that part doesn't need to be destroyed, it needs to be updated. When you understand this, the internal conflict softens, and you begin to act from a more integrated place. This understanding creates a new emotional state. You finally see that the fear of moving forward is just a boundary marker, and a boundary is a place of expansion. From this moment on, every step stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like construction. You no longer feel like you're risking everything. You feel like you're rebuilding everything. The emotional shift is silent. It happens when you catch yourself continuing, even in discomfort. When you notice that you avoided less, delayed less, escaped less, small behavioral changes begin to accumulate. And this accumulation creates a new perception. Maybe I can sustain what I want. This shift transforms the relationship between you and your goals. They stop feeling distant and start feeling close, not because the world changed, but because your mind stopped sabotaging the internal bridge between who you are and who you are becoming. That bridge is built with small acts of staying. In the end, the emotional shift is this: the first time you choose to continue despite wanting to retreat. That single gesture breaks the cycle, because instead of repeating the almost, you create a new emotional memory. You moved forward. And that memory, as small as it seems, is the beginning of the life you've been trying to reach. When we talk about quantum here, we're not talking about portals, lights, or mystical phenomena. We're talking about the way your brain, your nervous system, and your emotional body shape your perception of reality. Because biologically, your mind does not react to the future. It reacts to whatever it interprets as a threat, even when that threat is simply change. Your body works as a predictability system. It seeks to repeat what it already knows, because repetition equals safety. Every time you try to enter a new phase of your life, your emotional system interprets that as instability. And when it detects instability, it activates automatic defense responses that you feel as fear, doubt, and retreat. This mechanism works like an internal radar. It scans every new possibility looking for risk signals. When it finds anything that resembles old experiences, even subtle echoes, it triggers protective behaviors meant to shield you from the sensation of loss. That's why, when something important is about to happen, you feel more fear than excitement. What we call self-sabotage is actually your emotional system trying to prevent an internal collapse. For it, Change means confronting feelings that were buried. And because your system was trained to protect you from discomfort, it blocks movement. Not out of malice, but out of biological conditioning. This reaction creates a distorted perception of reality. You believe you're insecure because the path is dangerous, but the insecurity comes from memory, not the present moment. Your brain projects old stories onto new situations, and that projection makes you feel like you're always on the edge of failure, even when everything is aligned to succeed. The emotional quantum explanation is simple. Your mind works with probabilities shaped by past experience. It tries to predict the future using the past as reference. If the past recorded pain, instability, or loss, your mind assumes the future will bring the same. And to protect you from suffering, it paralyzes you before you go too far. But here's the crucial point. When you approach a major change, your emotional system senses that the previous timeline is losing strength. It senses that you're stepping out of the old identity. And this identity shift triggers resistance because your biological system doesn't know who you will be on the other side. Uncertainty creates automatic protection. This phenomenon creates internal friction. One part of you moves forward while another pulls you back. You interpret this friction as doubt, indecision, or lack of ability. But in reality, it is simply the overlap between an identity that is dying and one that is being born. This transition creates discomfort, not danger. When you understand this, the feeling changes. Instead of interpreting anxiety as a sign that something is wrong, you begin to see it as a sign of transformation. Your body is not telling you, stop. It is telling you, I am updating you. That new interpretation reduces the emotional intensity of the process. Another important point, the brain creates dominant emotional pathways. If you spent years repeating the cycle of almost, your mind sees that cycle as the most probable route. And anything you do that gets too close to victory triggers internal alarms. These alarms are not prophecies. They are neurological habits. The simplest explanation is this: your emotional system is not fighting your dreams. It is fighting the discomfort required to reach them. And as long as you interpret discomfort as a sign of danger, you will continue misunderstanding your internal signals, believing they are trying to stop you when, in reality, they are trying to protect you from a past that no longer exists. At the core, the explanation is clear. Your brain tries to keep you in the reality it knows, not the reality you desire. The change feels dangerous because it activates old memories. But when you stop interpreting discomfort as a sign that something will go wrong and begin seeing it as evidence of growth, the cycle of self-sabotage finally begins to lose its power. The first step to breaking the cycle of almost is simple, but profoundly transformative. You must interrupt the automatic escape pattern at the exact moment it begins. This happens within the first seconds when fear appears. Instead of interpreting that sensation as a danger signal, you will treat it as an alert of expansion. The shift begins when you create awareness in that critical instant. The second step is eliminating urgency. Urgency is one of the strongest triggers of self-sabotage. When you move too fast, your emotional system loses regulation and activates the same old impulses. Your action must be consistent, not impulsive. Moving slowly does not mean lack of ambition. It means you're building something your emotional system can sustain without collapsing. The third step is establishing daily micro-commitments. Not grand decisions, but small movements that keep the momentum alive. The brain needs safe repetition to understand that you are capable of sustaining a new life. These accumulated small steps activate a new emotional identity, an identity capable of finishing what it starts. This is how you create emotional stability. The fourth step is recognizing and ignoring the sabotaging internal dialogue. It will not disappear immediately, but you do not have to obey it. When phrases like "not now" or "better wait" appear, you will identify them as reflections of old conditioning. Just observe. Observation without automatic action weakens the pattern that has controlled you for years. The fifth step is staying in motion during emotional oscillation. On the days you feel motivated, you move. On the days you feel insecure, you move a little. The key is not stopping, not allowing discomfort to be interpreted as a sign to quit. Consistency creates the new emotional memory that replaces the old one. The sixth step is creating a practical rule. Never make important decisions when you are overtaken by fear. Fear distorts perspective, alters priorities, and convinces you to abandon solid paths. Decisions made in a fragile emotional state almost always favor the old pattern. Wait for clarity to return. Life changes when you learn to wait for lucidity before acting. The seventh step is strengthening your environment. You don't need anything extreme. Simply remove stimuli that feed doubt, comparison, and distraction, and add elements that reinforce continuity, commitment, and focus. Your emotional environment must align with what you are building. If it doesn't, it will pull you back to the same old versions. The eighth step is relying on real evidence, not sensations. Fear creates imaginary scenarios. You must replace those scenarios with concrete facts. Write down your progress, no matter how small. Review decisions that worked. Notice how much you already sustained today, things that would have paralyzed you in the past. The mind learns through contrast. The ninth step is developing tolerance for discomfort. Not tolerance for suffering, but for expansion. Every stage of growth activates emotions you are not used to feeling. This does not mean something is going wrong. It means something is changing. Tolerating this discomfort is what allows you to cross the invisible threshold that always made you stop. The 10th step is replacing the question, what if it goes wrong, with, what if it finally goes right? This simple shift moves your mind from threat to possibility. The brain follows the focus you give it. When you begin directing attention to what can work, your internal reaction changes, emotional resistance decreases, and action expands. The 11th step is taking responsibility only for the next move, not the final outcome. You do not control the future, but you control the next step. And when you focus on what is right in front of you, anxiety decreases. Your mind stops forecasting catastrophes and begins working with what is concrete. This brings your power back online. The 12th step is the most important. You must relearn how to stay, to remain, to sustain, to not run when your life begins asking more from you than you are used to giving. Staying is the act that breaks the cycle of almost. Self-sabotage only exists because you always interrupt. Victory happens when you choose to continue. We have reached the point where everything becomes clear. You were never incapable. You never lacked strength. You never lacked intelligence. What you lacked was understanding of the internal war you were fighting. Now that you see the mechanism, self-sabotage loses its invisibility. And when something stops being invisible, it stops controlling you. From this point on, you no longer walk blind. You also need to recognize something you may never have heard. The fact that you came so close so many times is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of potential. People with no potential do not reach the almost. You do. You always have. The difference now is that you have the emotional awareness to cross the threshold that used to stop you. Now you are equipped. From this point on, you must internalize a profound emotional truth. Fear does not mean something is wrong. It means something is changing. It means you are leaving the version that survives and entering the version that builds. That discomfort is simply the price of expansion, not a warning of danger. If you understand this, your life changes completely. The repetition of the cycle of almost does not define who you are. It defines only what you learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. You are not fighting destiny. You are fighting conditioning. Conditioning dies when exposed to awareness. And you have just exposed the biggest one. This opens a path that never existed before. Now you stand before a choice few people ever make: to remain a prisoner of the emotion that paralyzes you, or to become the person who crosses discomfort with intention. This decision does not happen once. It happens daily. And each small act of staying accumulates until it becomes identity. An identity capable of sustaining what you want to build. You are no longer trapped in the narrative that everything goes wrong in the end. That story is over. Now you understand that the end was never the problem. The problem was the moment fear took the wheel. But today, you saw the pattern clearly. And when something is seen, it is transformed. From here on, you can act from awareness, not reflex. You've already noticed that there is a version of you that does not collapse in the almost. A version that continues, sustains, moves forward. This version exists because it is based on facts, not fear. It is you when you are conscious, present, and aware. This is the version you must choose daily, until that choice becomes natural. Look at your path. You have already overcome things that once felt impossible. You have broken patterns that held you for years. You have lived changes that required courage you didn't even know you had. This means you are capable of carrying what you desire. What you need now is not strength. It is continuity. The life you want will not arrive while you keep stopping at the emotional threshold. It begins when you stay exactly at the point where you always quit. That is where everything transforms. That moment requires presence, not perfection. Commitment, not self-criticism. Decision, not guarantees. It requires you. So choose to stay. Choose to cross discomfort. Choose to sustain what you started. Choose to break the cycle that keeps you trapped in almost. This is your shift. This is your breaking point. It doesn't matter how many times you stepped back before. Today you have the emotional map you were missing. Now you know how to cross. And before you go, do one simple but powerful thing. Write in the comments which part of this video exposed you the most. Which part revealed your exact pattern. Naming the truth is the first step to disarming it. I want to see your clarity. I want to see you claiming your transformation. Because today is not just a video, it is an emotional turning point in your story.